didn't connect her with that. Got it. Okay, we'll start off with roll call. I am here, and Lisa.
Present. I'm here.
Karen Bergsvik.
I'm here.
Jim Christo. Jim is muted. I see him talking.
Okay, I'm here. Thank you.
All righty. Chris? Priest?
Here.
Cassie?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you. Dave Johnson?
I'm here.
Steve Pine?
Yes, I'm present.
Elizabeth Rhodes? I saw her earlier. Elizabeth?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Kathy Roche?
I'm here.
And Summer sends regrets. So, Jim Christo, without putting you on the spot, how about sharing with us what motivated you to join NLA? It's always interesting to hear that backstory.
Okay, well, I'm very new to Bend. I only moved here about 18 months ago. Joined my neighborhood association right away as a director. But what motivated me to get involved with SEBNA is just that my association's lack of action on a big land development across the street from us. So I was trying to get to a place where I could maybe make more of a difference here. And then as far as NLA, I was basically nominated by the board. Excuse me, I'm kind of on a liquid diet preparation for a medical procedure tomorrow, so here I am. I spent about 45 years working for NASA in Maryland, and it just, like I say, moved out here about a year and a half ago. So here I am.
Well, welcome.
Nice.
Thank you.
And nice to meet all you people. Hope to meet you in person sometime in the near future.
Personal question, Jim. Did you work at Goddard?
Yes, I did.
What did you do there?
Well, I worked on the Hubble Space Telescope for many years before its launch, and my part worked. And then I've worked on search and rescue program for about the last 20 years until I retired. And I'm still a part-time consultant with NOAA on the same program.
My company was the one that put together the first servicing mission.
Oh, okay.
I was with CTA at the time.
CTA, I know them well. We worked with them a lot too. We also did a lot of testing, radio frequency testing on the Hubble Space Telescope. So, like I say, my part worked when it got into orbit. But thanks for the question.
I'll let
You guys
us get on.
will have to compare notes at some point.
Yep.
Next up, minutes. Is there a motion to approve the October minutes?
So moved.
Dave Johnson moves to approve the minutes. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Lisa seconds. Are any opposed? Okay, well, with that, that is unanimous, I believe. It should be 11-0, Kayla, for the records. And we'll move on to public comments. Michaela, none written?
No written public comment. So at this time, we'll let you and Juan open it up for oral comments.
Okay, and I will anticipate for oral comments. Yeah, Juan's letting you know to use the raise hand function. I have something that I need, something rather official that I will read for anyone making oral comments. Any person may address the NLA on items not listed in the agenda that are properly the subject of NLA consideration. In order to run an efficient meeting, the NLA will not respond to questions or engage in discussion with speakers during the meeting. The NLA may follow up with speakers after the meeting. Please be aware of the timer set up for, and I'll wait and see how many speakers we have, but typically 3 minutes per person, which will be displayed on screen. When invited to comment, begin by stating your name and who you are representing. And if it's yourself, simply state, I will ask you to conclude your comments when your time is up so that we hear from everyone. This is an opportunity to provide public input. It is not a time to insult others, level personal attacks or threats, disrupt the meeting, or in any way discourage anyone else from participating. People are free to disagree with each other on issues, but we must do so respectfully. We ask and expect everyone to abide by these rules. So that being said, I'm open to public oral comments, and I'll need someone to kind of help me look for raised hands here.
And at this time, I'm not seeing any hands, Chair.
Or any chair hands. Okay. I guess I didn't need to read all that in retrospect. Okay, first up presentation, Damian Cernick is here. This is our second presentation on Southeast Area Plan. We heard from Damian back in March, if you recall. Obviously, Southeast Area is a big development. Damian's been working with the Southeast Area Plan Advisory Committee, CPAC, on this development that the city quite some time ago labeled the elbow. Early next year, I think the Southeast Area Plan goes to Planning Commission and Council for adoption. So probably NLA participation in that process is going to happen later at that time when we start engaging council and planning. So I'm going to ask attendees to allow Damian to finish his presentation. Again, this presentation, as well as the following presentation on Juniper Ridge, our intention here is to provide information to NLA reps to take back to your boards. Obviously, these presentations are part of public meetings, so they are available, but it's important for you to understand so that you can report to your boards appropriately. If there are questions, let's try and limit them to questions of the content, unless they're particularly relevant or questions you know your board is already prepared to ask of Damian. And with that, I'll kick it off to Juan and Damian.
All right, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. And Juan, will you be presenting my presentation?
If you're able to present it, if you like, Damian, if you just click on share screen, if you're comfortable doing it.
I can do that. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can everybody see that okay?
Yes, sir.
I see nodding. All right, so I'll dive right in. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Damian Cernick. I'm a senior planner with the city's Growth Management Division. And I'm here today to give you a presentation on our work on the Southeast Area Plan. And as your chair pointed out, the last time I was here to present on this project was March 10th, just a few days before the governor issued the stay-at-home order. But like a lot of the work we're doing at the city, we've been able to continue working on this project and make some good progress. So as a kind of a brief refresher about the area we're talking about, on the left of your screen, you'll see a map of the 2016 Urban Growth Boundary Expansion, or UGB expansion. The area that we're focusing on for this plan at that time was called the Elbow. Since that time, we were referring to it as the Southeast Expansion Area. It includes roughly 479 acres of land that are north of Knott Road on the south, west of 27th, east of 15th Street, and then south of Ferguson. And to give you a couple of the landmarks here, Caldera High School is under development right here. High Desert Middle School is right here. And then to the right, you'll see the Deschutes County Road Department and then the Knott landfill. Back in 2016, when this area was added to the UGB, the City Council also adopted some changes to our comprehensive plan map that you see here on this slide. And this included a combination of different types of land uses. Similar to what you see on the zoning map, the areas in light yellow, dark brown are for residential. They are for multiple types of housing. Areas in red were for general commercial. The areas that you see in kind of a light purple here and here, for example, were for mixed employment. And then this is an area that you see in dark purple and dark, or kind of a lighter gray, were designated for industrial uses in industrial jobs. So before going on, I wanted to kind of recap what we're creating with this Southeast Area Plan. During the work on the UGB back in 2016, there was policy language added to the plan to allow for area planning for these areas that included multiple ownerships. And it was an opportunity to refine the land uses in the area based on a community vision for growth. We wanted to ensure that as we did this detailed planning, it was coordinated with the work that our district partners like the school and park district were doing, but also making sure it was coordinated with our work on transportation, water, and sewer infrastructure. And then finally, we wanted to create an opportunity to look at adopting specific tools for implementation, for example, changes to the comp plan or zoning map or the development code itself. One of the things that we did up front with our advisory committee, the Southeast Area Plan Advisory Committee, is to work with them to adopt a vision for the Southeast and some guiding principles. So on the upper left of this slide, you'll see the word cloud of the work we did with them back in January of last year. On the bottom half of the screen, you'll see the vision for the Southeast expansion area. I'm not going to read it and violate, good PowerPoint protocols, but I'll highlight a few things. It was one of the goals of our committee to look at a complete and walkable community in the Southeast so that it had housing, neighborhood services, places for working, but also schools and parks. And so we've used that vision and the guiding principles you see in the upper right to guide our work for developing the Southeast Area Plan. In addition to CPAC, who we've been working with since December of 2018, we've had a number of opportunities for more community-wide engagement. Between then and now, we've had 10 meetings with CPAC. Over the last, roughly 6 months, we've had 3 virtual meetings like the one you're having today, where we've been able to interact with them and get feedback and direction on the work we're doing. With our last meeting coming up on December 3rd of this year. Last year, we did have a couple of in-person open houses. And right now, we have an online open house that I'll talk about more than once to get feedback, share concepts. We've got some survey questions we're asking people to fill out. That started on October 22nd, and it's going to be open through this end of day, this Thursday, November 12th. So there's still an opportunity to drive this out to your neighborhood associations and let interested persons know that they can take a closer look at the work we're doing here, and then also weigh in depending if they want to provide us with some written comments or respond to some of the surveys or both. I'm going to transition now into, over the next few slides, kind of reviewing some of the graphics that you would see on the online open house, but they also reflect the work we're doing with the Southeast Area Plan Advisory Committee. What you see here is our refined land use and transportation plan that we've developed for the Southeast expansion area. What this reflects is the moving around and changing of some of the colors on the comp plan map. In the Southwest, there's a combination of residential zoning along with commercial zoning to provide the zoning framework for a town center. We're also looking at a similar concept up here at Ferguson and 27th with some general commercial here, transitioning to some high density residential and then medium density residential as you get closer to the existing residences west of Magnolia. This also reflects a couple of changes we're going to bring forward to the transportation system plan map. One is a relocation of a collector road. This is the intersection here of Caldera and 15th. So the transportation plan for this area includes extending Caldera east to 27th Street, north of the middle school. It also includes a proposed north-south collector to provide a second route between Ferguson and 15th. We've also proposed changing some of the designations down here in the south, kind of north of Knott Road, to recognize existing neighborhood. There's a number of existing residences in the area, but also plan for some future employment and services in the area, with located the mixed employment closer to the intersection of the two collector roads here at the roundabout intersection. With the next few slides, what I want to do is kind of illustrate what's possible with the plan changes we're proposing. So on the left side here, you'll see some conceptual illustrations for land uses in the Northeast, including a town center, potential location for a park, the extension of Via Sandia east to 27th, but also some of the elements that we're looking at with the Southeast, including connections to local roads. On several of the graphics that I'll show, you'll see these green lines representing future multi-use paths. And then on the right side, you'll see some examples of either the type of development that would be possible, or some features that we're looking to include or protect as part of the development in the area. So moving south of the area we just saw a moment ago, this is the area in the southeast part of the study area. It's adjacent to the future High Desert Community Park on the lower left side, and then High Desert Middle School. And this gives you an idea about what's possible with development of kind of light industrial mixed employment buildings in the area. One of the things that we used to refine our work was a land use and market study that was done by Eco Northwest that concluded that kind of heavier type of industrial uses like manufacturing, maybe warehousing and wholesale, might not find this area attractive given its location adjacent to existing neighborhoods and some of the topography. But other light industrial uses, research and development, and flex space would be better, more likely tenants and owners of buildings and uses down here. And what you see on the left side is an example of what this might look like with development on either side of Caldera, plus some extensions of the local street system. And one thing I should point out, when you look at some of these maps, you'll see shapes like this here and here, which represent some significant rock outcrops that we've identified and proposed to have development standards to incorporate these in development of the Southeast. And what you see with the shape there on the map is the actual outline of the feature on the ground based on some survey work we did to digitize the location and size of some of these features. And then finally, this is kind of like the last example of what we're looking at for the Southeast. This is the Southwest sub-area. This is the area north of Knott between the North-South Collector and 15th Street. This is an area, as I mentioned, that has some proposed residential land to kind of recognize the existing neighborhood that's there. As you move west toward 15th, there's some kind of conceptual design for a town center with commercial land along Knott Road. And then as you go north from there, moving into some medium density housing, a potential school site as an idea, given its location to Caldera High School, and then more single family with some parks to the north. And I want to highlight that this area to the north here, which includes this rectangle, is a kind of a lighter shade of the Easton Master Plan that was recently approved for Polish homes by the City Council. And what we've tried to do is show how this work would integrate with the work we've been doing in the Southeast, including the extension of Caldera to the east. And as you see there, also the incorporation of multi-use paths with the development. So returning to infrastructure for just a moment. We've incorporated planning for sewer, transportation, and water infrastructure with our work on the Southeast Area Plan. This is an area that's already served by the Avion Water Company. So where their work differs a little bit from ours is they don't do a lot of advanced planning, but really more respond to development as it occurs. But we've coordinated our work with theirs so they know where, for example, on the left, we're looking at potential locations for gravity sewer lines, a regional pump station, and then a force main that will transfer wastewater to the Southeast Interceptor. And then on the right, that reflects some of the work we've been doing with respect to transportation in terms of identifying, again, road locations for both collectors and local roads, intersection improvements, whether they're like a roundabout or not a roundabout here and here. For example, a two-way stop intersection. And we've been coordinating our work here in the Southeast also with the Oregon Department of Transportation, so we can inform their work on potential traffic impacts to intersections and making sure that we've got funding mechanisms in place to help them fund future improvements to a couple of their key intersections. Going back to the work on multi-use paths, I wanted to highlight this work because this is something we've done collaboratively with the Bend Park and Recreation District. Back in 2018, the district adopted a new comprehensive plan, which included a system of trails. And so what we've done is try to incorporate their work here with some refinements. You see with some of the kind of like orange, kind of rust-colored lines on the map, those reflect locations of multi-use paths that would be in the a public right-of-way adjacent to a street. Kind of the green shaded ones, like this one, for example, are trails intended to follow easements and then existing local road rights-of-way. And this also includes access, or I should say outlines the trails that are planned for the Trans-Canada pipeline, which is right here as well. And the low stress network, up here going into the existing neighborhoods north and south of Ferguson. So with respect to where we are in time, as I mentioned, we have the online open house going on right now. If you share your link with your boards and your membership, they can go online to what they'll see on the right, to our Southeast Area Plan open house website. Once they open the link, they'll see a lot of the same graphics that you saw here today. There's an opportunity to provide written comments, but also respond to some surveys that we're providing online. So we can get feedback on some of the graphics, code concepts, plan changes, and infrastructure that we're looking at in the Southeast. With respect to CPAC, as I mentioned, our next meeting is coming up on December 3rd. We expect that'll be our last meeting where we ask them to make a recommendation to Planning Commission. The dates that you see there for Planning Commission and City Council right now are kind of tentative. We think we're going to be moving to Planning Commission in January. And in my communication with Michaela, that would be an opportunity where we'd notify kind of a broader group than our usual project email list. So we'd reach out to advisory committees to invite them to the work session so they can learn more about the project and then decide how much they want to weigh in and provide comments. City Council is a little bit more tentative, just given we've got 4 new city councilors being sworn in January. And I know after they are sworn in, there's going to be some time for orientation. They're going to start goal setting. So those dates are tentative right now, but we think it's going to be in that time period where we take the plan to council for their adoption. And my email address is on there as well. So if you have follow-up questions, comments, trying to access something on the website, it is all there at our project website. including all the CPAC materials going back to our first meeting in December. So that concludes my presentation, and I think we've got a few minutes for questions if there are any.
Thank you, Damien. Interesting stuff. And if my calculation is correct, this is 20% of the area that was granted to us under our UGB expansion, so it's pretty significant. Questions out there? Might need some help looking for hands, but
I'm not seeing any.
nor am I.
Hey,
So
wait,
test-
wait, I can't find my hand up. I have a question about, so what is the relevance of this, if you can point us to any, for the rest of the city? Is this setting precedents?
Pardon me?
Does it set any precedents?
You know, I think it does. I think one of the reasons we're trying to be broad in our involvement is that this is the first area plan we're doing for one of our expansion areas. We have followed a project scope that we worked out with our consultant team. I think we're learning some things that will inform our next work on our next UGB project. And so I think we're also trying to be broad to get some feedback from folks on things that might be worth trying in other parts of the city, things that maybe not. And so we're trying to cast a broad net to see what we can learn.
Okay, thanks.
I see Lisa's hand, Hans.
Say
Hi.
again, Michaela?
Is it my turn?
Yes.
Thank you. Damien, approximately how many homes or how many residences are we expecting in this area?
We have a policy in our plan that requires us to make sure we've got at least capacity for about 820, and I think we're getting closer to 1,200. And that is including not just single family homes, but also dwelling units that would be kind of considered middle housing, so duplexes, triplexes, row housing, but also an area that we've looked at for some higher density housing, the area south of Ferguson. In fact, I might just, I'm still sharing, go back up to the land use maps, we can all see it here, and that way I can point. So up in here as well. Any other questions?
Karen Bergsvik has her hand raised.
Thank you. So I have a question. When we were talking about the micro units, we talked a lot about available services near housing, you know, like laundromats and grocery stores and medical facilities. And I know you can't, I guess my question is, how do you encourage those kinds of businesses to locate in this kind of development?
That's a great question. You know, what we're trying to do is set the table with land that we can show is zoned and has infrastructure available. It has code that allows for mixed use development and more of those services. And then just kind of speaking from my experience, what I've been hearing back is from property owners that are talking with maybe future buyers, future agents, some developers who are then, you know, in communication with the city about things they're thinking about with this area. You know, once the plan is adopted and the plan changes are put into effect. You know, just to give you some examples I've heard from some folks that are looking at doing some multifamily, some that are looking at more of a town center, like in the Southwest. So maybe not a perfect answer to your question, but we are trying to get the word out there that this area is available for that kind of development, and you know, trying to work with folks that want to do something like that in this area.
I'm not seeing any more hands.
Damien, thank you.
Thank you. So again, if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email me. I'm going to stop sharing and then let you kind of wish you a good rest of your meeting. Thank you very much for your time.
You be putting this on the CPAC website so that those of us in the NLA can pass it around to our boards?
The presentation or the link to the open house?
The presentation.
Yeah, I can work with our staff to get it uploaded later this week so they can have some access to it and then refer to it as they want. Thank you.
Okay. Next up, Carolyn, and I want to thank Carolyn for, it was a bit of a last minute invite to the agenda. Obviously, the Juniper Ridge homeless transition topic has been in the news every which way, of a special interest to our friends at Boyd Acres, of course, but at the same time, when Michaela and Lisa and I get together weekly to make some last minute changes where we think it's appropriate, this seemed like a great opportunity. Again, what we want to do is give Carolyn an opportunity to get the information to us so that we can get it to our boards. And if we find ways to facilitate that, that's great. But I think it's really important that we get as much accurate information as possible as opposed to misinformation, and understand some of the things that went into the deciding factors. And at some point in this presentation, we may be alluding, I suppose, to legal as well, but I'll leave it to Carolyn to run that portion of it. But again, let's try and get to the end of the presentation, and then whatever questions we have to be sure we understand the content, we'll deal with it at that point. So Carolyn, it's all yours.
Hans, thank you so much. I really appreciate that introduction. I'll just take a second. This is my first time to the NLA, and I want to take a minute, introduce myself, but first thank all of you for your service to our community and for joining these late afternoon and evening meetings. So I'm Carolyn Egan. I serve as the city's economic development director, which, just for some reference, I'm responsible for the Bend Municipal Airport, which is out east of town, responsible for the city's affordable housing program, responsible for the city's business advocacy program and our relationship with both EDCO and Visit Bend, relationship for the development, responsible for the development of Juniper Ridge as an industrial park, and then also responsible for the city's urban renewal division. So we spread across many issues that are touched related to Juniper Ridge. And so at this point, I would say we're the lead department along with the city manager's office in this project. And so I am so eager to hear your questions and suggestions about how we need to share this information, different information, better information with the members of our community. And so I want to get through this thoroughly so that we have all the right information out there, but I just can't tell you all enough how open I am to hearing from you about what we ought to be doing next to bring this forward. And you'll have to forgive Michaela. I mean, this is the first time she's ever driven slides for me. So if anything seems clunky, you can blame me. But go ahead, Michaela, to the next slide, please. So when we presented to council on October 21st, the first thing that we reminded them was that there was a huge effort underway related to the planning of the industrial area that we all know and love, I like to think, as Juniper Ridge. And the Juniper Ridge Management Advisory Board was going to, and they just did that on November 4th, recommendations to really make the industrial area in Juniper Ridge work. For those of us like me who've been watching this for almost definitely 15 years, it has been sort of like this promise that never comes true. And so finally, we have made recommendations to the council on how we can more effectively develop Juniper Ridge. One of those recommendations is that we recognize that we have too much land in Juniper Ridge inside the city limits for the city's planned employment needs, and we need to probably convert some of that land to residential. So that's where we started when we talked to council on the 21st. Go ahead, next slide, Michaela. We know, as many of you know, probably even more intimately than I, that there were significant measures taken over the last year to move individuals and families experiencing homelessness from the alignment of the North Interceptor so that we could build the North Interceptor. And you'll recall that the construction of the North Interceptor was an integral part to being able to develop the industrial site and to really develop the whole north end of Bend as we think about the housing that is planned on the west side of 97, between 97 and 20. And so we did that. No one was happy with us as that went on, but what we were able to do as that effort took place is we gained a lot of relationships with the families and individuals who are camping in Juniper Ridge and have a much better understanding of what their needs are. We have regular service providers going out to the campers who are there, and we are one by one having successes connecting some of those individuals and families to social services, which is what we would all hope for, I think, to kind of re-enfranchise the individuals and families that are camping out there and may otherwise not want to be connected to regular society. Go ahead to the next slide, Michaela. And then August 15th happened. And for those of you who live on the north side of Bend, we had a fire. And the fire was caused by a vehicle that got caught crossing one of the city's permitted crossings of the BNSF railway. Unfortunately, this was not the first time that we had a vehicle get stuck. It happened earlier in the summer. This is the van on the right side of your screen. Was stuck, and it was actually hit at the first crossing. The train could not stop, and by the time the train stopped, it was at our further north crossing, and so we had to remove that vehicle. And then the second incident was the one that started the fire, where the vehicle, it was a not well running RV that got caught on the rail line and put thousands and of housing units and businesses at risk. For those of you who weren't watching this that night of the fire, if it had not been for the aerial assets that happened to be on the ground in Central Oregon on this day, the fire would have been catastrophic. So after this second fire, the city got a call from BNSF and said, hey, that permission, those licenses that we've provided to you to cross the rail, they're not meant to be public. Those are meant to be private. Why aren't you protecting your crossings? And we said, we need to protect the crossings. And they said, yes, you do. And so it became very evident that we needed to and have since begun talking to BNSF, and we've gotten permission from council to purchase and install locking gates to prevent the public use of those crossings over the railway, so that we can reduce the likelihood of this type of incident happening again. Go ahead to the next slide, Michaela. So this is a map of the north end of Juniper Ridge. So you'll remember Juniper Ridge is 500 acres inside the city limit, north of Cooley Road and east of US 97. And then there is another, that's 500 acres, but there's another 1,000 acres that's in the county. And the land you're seeing here is the acreage that's in the county. We are north of the city limit. There's 3 X's there. Those are the legal crossings of the railway. The 2 further north, the yellow ones are ours. And you can see that the land there, those black lines there are really the Jeep trails that we have. And so access throughout the city-owned property in the county it's barely accessible. And one of the real concerns from our fire department is that they don't feel comfortable putting ground assets into Juniper Ridge to fight a fire. There is a concern that firefighters would become trapped, which is why the aerial assets were necessary to fight that fire. There is another access, informal access, I guess you would call it, off Deschutes Market Road. This is the green, I think it's a green dot with a G in it. And so you can see that access too, but none of these are roads, none of them are legal accesses, and it is imperative for the city's future growth that we protect the licensed crossing over the railway. But in Oregon, it is really difficult for us to put roads or other access points in this land while it's still in the county. We really need it to come into the city to be able to build out those roads. We have lots of unauthorized access, as you can imagine, but according to our fire chief, we do have a higher fire risk based on just topography and fuels on the north end of the city limit than we do in other areas. So there's camping off China Head, and there's camping east of town, and they're camping even west of town, but this is the place where just the topography and the fuel loading is more significant and of higher concern to our fire chief. Go ahead, Michaela. So pardon me while I just take a deep breath. The next complicating matter of this is that different from the situation when we asked individuals and families to move off our North Interceptor alignment, since then a district court case was decided based on Grants Pass. And what the Blake versus Grant Pass case told us is that if you have individuals who are on your land, on your city land, and you don't want them camping there, the only way that you can ask them to move is if you have a shelter bed for them. And so as we think about needing to put the locking gates at the railway so that we can reduce the likelihood of fire and reduce the illegal crossing, we essentially trap about 75 individuals and families behind the gates with no way to access a road system. And so we need to find another place for them to have a safe place to sleep. And so when we think about how we protect those rail crossings, and we think about how we can meet the letter of the Oregon case law, we need a better approach. We need a location where we can provide shelter beds for the individuals who are camping on the city-owned property in Juniper Ridge in the county. And I'm not gonna joke, like, we know that the individuals that are camping there don't want service. I mean, we're making strides for sure in terms of building relationships, but these are individuals who have otherwise said, I don't want to be in a shelter. I don't want to be around anybody. I want to find, I want to, a little bit like the homesteading, let me go fend for myself. That said, what the Oregon case law tells us is that it's still our obligation to make sure that there are shelter beds available. So that there's some sense of the scope, we have about 1,000 individuals who at any one night are experiencing homelessness in Central Oregon. And even in the winter, which is when we have all the winter warming shelters open, we have fewer at any time than like 400 shelter beds. So we simply do not have enough shelter beds in Central Oregon to accommodate the existing number of people experiencing homelessness, and then the growing the growing number of people who are experiencing homelessness. Go ahead, Michaela. So what we've asked council to support is what we're calling a continuum of housing. And it has 3 stages, if you will. The first is in the short term. And we said we need to put the gates at the crossings. So we're saying that under the existing city manager's COVID emergency declaration, we had already needed to provide some flexibility around shelter beds so that we could address some of the COVID issues. And so we are working with partners to try to open up church parking lots or other locations across town that may be able to serve as a temporary shelter for families experiencing homelessness. We also, at the same time, we had the passing of House Bill 4212, which allows agencies, organizations to apply to cities to say, we have this property and we want to use it as a shelter site. So we received 4 of those. 2 of them are viable, and we're expecting city manager approval of those 2 sites. The one that probably is the most familiar to individuals on this call are the Veterans Village. We're opening the winter warming shelter, and we have asked council for permission to evaluate the feasibility, so to explore the feasibility of looking at a temporary transitional site in Juniper Ridge. And the site that we originally talked about, or that we talked to council about, would be accessed off Cooley Road. But we are simply, this is where I think the most confusion is. What we asked council was permission to explore the feasibility. It's not any different. So if Hans owned a hotel and I wanted to ask him to purchase that hotel to acquire for a shelter, I don't have to ask city council permission for that. I'm allowed to do that as staff. In this case, since it's city owned property, we needed council permission to explore this site before we could start doing it. So it got, in some sense, it got out ahead of us, but it's the way that we had to do it. And so exploring feasibility for a site in Juniper Ridge has broadly 3 parts. 1, the emergency order requires that any location for a shelter site have a managed homeless camp or a management component. So if we were going to acquire a hotel, we would want to make sure that there was a social service provider providing services and providing management of that shelter site. If we were going to use an old campground, we would want to make sure that there was a camp host and there were other rules and regulations around that managed camp. So it absolutely had to have a managed camp component. We're working diligently with the partners at the Homeless Leadership Alliance and other experts in this field to develop that managed camp contract. We had to determine if it was feasible. So can you even provide gravel access? If we have a gravel surface, is that sufficient? Can we provide temporary sanitation facilities? Can the social service providers get in there? And then we really needed to understand if individuals who are experiencing homelessness would even want to use this site. And so those are the 3 parts of the feasibility, and we're exploring all of that now. So a big part of that is getting out to the neighbors who are adjacent to the potential site and understand what their concerns are. So I've been working through formal channels and finally just realized today that I think I'm gonna, and Michaela may not even know this yet, but ask Michaela to schedule some listening sessions with the Boyd Acres neighbors particularly, but with any neighbors who are interested. And then finally, we've asked, thanks, Michaela. And then finally, we asked the council, and this is really the most strategic part of the recommendation, is to ask council to sort of give the nod to the city manager to form an emergency homelessness task force. And what we would like to do with this, and what council has largely supported, is for Eric King as the city manager to pull together the highest level individuals at the most important, like the most prominent social service agencies in our region, to start to say, okay, you all have been in this world for a long time. You understand the funding, you understand the needs, where are the holes, and what do we need to be doing? Tom Anderson from the county has committed fully to participating in that, and he recognizes that it is a city and county effort to address this. So these are the things that we're looking at in the short term. You know, when we all talked about Governor Brown's reopening plan in phase 2, I think we thought maybe phase 2 would go until now and we'd be in phase 3. Feels like with every week, we're understanding that phase 2 is longer. So at this point in terms of timing, I think we're thinking of the short term as being through the spring or summer of next year. Fingers crossed for a widely available vaccine, which would move us into phase 3, which would mean we would no longer have a city manager's order in place under which we could site the camp at Juniper Ridge. So there is a timing aspect. The medium term for this is to look at, we talked about the recommendations for the Juniper Ridge Management Board, to look at some of the land in Juniper Ridge that was originally slated for employment. So this would be the land that is east of the alignment of the North Interceptor, but west of the old canal. and look at that land to convert that from underlying industrial land to underlying residential land, so that we could begin to have a better, just more units, more shelter beds, more housing units. And we already build housing, we fund the building of housing at the City of Bend, and this would add to that strategy. And then longer term, we need to acquire more motels so that we have better shelter beds. We really need to understand the needs of, you've probably heard low barrier, high barrier housing for camps or for shelter sites. So really need to explore the needs of the community. We need to make sure we continue to see the money from the state come into our region for the long-term solution. And then we absolutely need to build more housing units. Go ahead, Michaela. And so this is the map. So right now, the purple dot at the bottom of your map, thank you, Michaela, is where we've originally asked council for permission to explore the feasibility of a managed homeless camp. Again, it's a rudimentary site. We're talking gravel access and gravel surface and temporary sanitation services. So hand washing stations, shower truck, porta potties, and then regularly scheduled visits from both social services and medical services. This site would have a camp host, would have some barrier that delineated being in the camp and not in the camp, and then really follow industry practice on what a managed homeless camp does. So we talked about a 6-acre site. We are not talking about a 6-acre homeless camp. Industry practice tells us that 20 sites, so 20 individuals or families who would be camping at one location is about right. And there's a lot of decisions still to be made about who would be camping there, who would be the contractor. There's a lot of decisions to be made. So then this medium term and the long term strategy is where Michaela's cursor is now. So the blue line, so for each of you know, that is the North Interceptor alignment. So we're really using this as a strong delineator between, and this came from the Juniper Ridge Management Advisory Board. So we were using the framework that they had already had in place to recommend to council. Anything that's west of that North Interceptor would stay industrial, and then look at the land east of the North Interceptor alignment, between the North Interceptor alignment and the old canal, as switching from employment to housing. And so this orange circle is where we are proposing that the city go ahead and develop and construct an RV camp, RV park or campground. One of the things we know is that we have members of our community, they're experiencing homelessness, but really it's transitional. So they have a house secured for December 1st, but they need to be out of their current house on December 15th. And so they need a place for a couple weeks. They may have an RV, they may just have a tent, but making sure we provide some locations here. The other thing that we run into is that if we're going to truly build out Juniper Ridge, we need construction workers, and we know that construction workers can't always find housing. And so the RV park and campground would also serve a need for workers who are working up here to build some of these manufacturing plants and office buildings on a short term or kind of whatever term basis it is, probably 12 to 18 months as they work there. And then the area in yellow is what we would like to subdivide and donate to some of our affordable housing builders so that we can get some of the more of the units on the ground that we need. So one of the things that we know is that households that are earning 30% of area median income or less, so that's about $25,000 a year for a family of 4. If you talk to Deschutes County Mental Health, 100% of their clients are at 30% of AMI and less, and there is no housing for them. And so we need to switch our priorities at the City of Bend. Typically we say, how many units can you build? I think we may hear council ask our Affordable Housing Committee to say, how many units can you build for this income level? We also know that we have social service providers who would love to locate in this area. So it's about putting a mix of housing and services up here to provide additional housing units for Bend. And so the last slide are what the council recommendations were. Oh, no, 42, this is 4212. I talked about that. Keep going. So we asked for permission to look at the site at Juniper Ridge. We asked council if they would be okay with Eric creating the task force, and we asked them to consider the medium and long-term strategies in their goal setting for 21-23. That we also asked them for permission, pardon me, to purchase and install the gates at the rail crossings, but to install them and lock them in the open position until we have the shelter beds online that we need to provide an option to those who are camping up in Juniper Ridge. And that is, I have one backup slide, I think. Oh no, that's the end of this presentation. So thank you, everyone. Hans, thank you so much for your giving me the floor.
Thanks, Carolyn. I raised my hand, so I'm going to take the liberty, since you passed it back to me, to ask a question. I realize it's really difficult to project the timeline, and you spoke to it roughly calling short term into the spring, and then I heard a 12 to 18 month, probably the medium term, and then the longer term, building more affordable houses and such. I'm anticipating that's a couple years down the road, but not to put too fine an edge on this, but am I hearing that, only because my perception is the transitional camping area seems to be the more volatile issue here. Am I hearing that the estimate would be that if we go forward with this, that it might be in position for a year or 18 months, or is there a sunset imagined on this homeless transition camp?
So for the site that we asked for permission to explore at Juniper Ridge, accessed off Cooley Road, the intent is that that transitional camp would only be in place while the city manager's emergency order is in place, and that ends at the end of phase 2. So if, based on what we're understanding about the vaccine maybe being available in the next couple of weeks, you could see a timeline where widely available vaccine, which is the determinant from going from phase 2 to phase 3, could happen as soon as the summer or fall for Oregon. So we really would only, if we were to have an extremely expedited process and we had a camp available for members of our community to move on to, let's just say January 15th, that camp would only be in place through the summer and fall while we're in phase 2 of Governor Brown's reopening Oregon plan. As soon as phase 3 commences, and hopefully we get a little more notice for phase 3 than we did earlier, but we would then we would absolutely decommission the camp at the Juniper Ridge site. We would no longer have the authority to have that in place. There's no development code adopted at Juniper Ridge to be able to allow for any shelter, any residential uses, let alone shelter or really informal shelter locations. Oh, put your microphone on, Hans.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Kathy.
What, if any, applicability to the rest of the city does this have? Is this strictly a local issue? I think that you did a wonderful job for presenting all this to Boyd Acres, but it didn't relieve any of their anxiety, and it's still quite a controversial item, to put it lightly. So, but is there anything that the rest of the group should learn about this other than Boyd Acres is unhappy?
Thank you for that question. And I can't say enough, I appreciate how unhappy the neighbors in Boyd Acre. I don't want to in any way express anything other than that. I really appreciate the sentiment that we're getting from them. The emergency order allows under 17, so this is sort of like under section 17 and 18 of the city manager's emergency order related to COVID, it does allow for these informal temporary transitional sites. So Juniper Ridge would be one. We have submitted a formal request to the owners of the old KOA site, asking if they would be willing to enter into a lease agreement with us to do a temporary transitional site there. I don't have full authority over this, Kathy, but I feel like if we got any kind of indication from the owners of that old KOA site that they would be willing to enter into an agreement with us, that the demand for the site off Cooley would go away instantly. We really need a site that's less rudimentary than the site at Juniper Ridge would be. We also have some churches who have said, we know we need to come in as part of this solution. And so we may see that the same rules that we would use to allow us to put that site in Juniper Ridge are in place that would allow any of your faith-based communities to use their parking lots, and with a managed camp component for safer overnight parking. So sort of a safe to park kind of program where rather than trying to duck between two, largely vacant streets to park your car overnight, you would actually have a safer place where you could park legally overnight. So we are looking absolutely at sites in addition to the ones on the north end of town. I personally think that there are some very centrally located sites, but the city doesn't own them. And so one of the things that I just started having conversations is with the Homeless Leadership Coalition. So they're the group of service providers, medical providers, and professionals who know a whole lot more about homelessness than I do, to think about sites that they think would be better and see if we could advocate with those elected bodies to use some of those sites. So Kathy, I can't reiterate, this is the site off Cooley Road is just one site that we're exploring because we know we need the shelter beds. And we know that we have families and individuals who are camping in unsafe situations, and we would really like to provide some additional level of safety and security until we can get those families into safer housing.
Thanks. I'd just like to say, from my personal viewpoint, I'm glad to see the city doing something, and I kind of trust your process and know that you're looking at Juniper Ridge because you need to do something. And so, to me, being as close as I was to that fire, it would be much better to have a managed site there than to have unmanaged stuff keep going on in the north part that's so hard to access. So that's my personal opinion. Boyd Acres has, the board has expressed their formal opinion to the city in many different ways.
Yes, thank you. I think the important piece is, Kathy just touched on, is about controlling fuels, for lack of a better word. When individuals are camping in that very fire-prone area north of the city, they have fuel. I mean, whether it's their personal belongings or their food fire or their warming fires. When we do a managed camp, especially in this environment, no open flames would be allowed. So we would have warming for heat and for food preparation, but they wouldn't be open flame. And so it does provide us an additional level of fire. I'm coming up with the wrong word, but so that we could reduce the risk of fire.
Yeah. Thank
I have
you.
a quick. I have my hands up. This is Cassie. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, this is about the people that are camping on Century Drive, and I'm just curious. Are you looking at areas around Bend where this is happening, and then how do we, as a neighborhood association, work with the city on sort of these issues?
Okay, we definitely were looking. So we are working, I mean, I'm probably meeting more than once a week with the advocates who are providing direct service to all the camps. So we weekly have a good sense. We don't have a map, but we have a mental map of all the locations where we know camping is happening. So whether it's Hunnell Road or Clawson Drive or Century Drive or Alfalfa Market Road or China Hat, we're aware of those camps. Our outreach partners are talking with those community members on a regular basis. I think the type of things that would be helpful from the neighborhoods are, how do we help, right? Who are the agencies who could provide this service effectively? So, you know, Shepherd's House, you might be familiar with Shepherd's House. They're on Division Street. They are the agency that got the funds together to open the warming shelter. How can we make sure that Shepherd's House and like them have access to the funds they need to operate the existing shelter beds that we have? The other would be helping us identify what your community needs to feel safe. So if, and I'm making this up, Cassie, because this is not in the plans as far as I know, if we had a site that was off Century Drive, and so the camping, we know that we have camping at the campground that's across from in at the 7th Mountain off Century Drive. What sort of agreements would your community need to feel safe that this managed camp was actually going to protect your neighborhood, not just protect the guests, the people who are staying at the camp? What sort of expectations do you have for the Bend Police Department that say, okay, if you're going to open these camps and we're going to put community resources and have a managed camp program with each of these sites, what's your plan for moving the people who aren't staying in those locations? Because when I look at Hunnell Road in particular, we don't have a good solution. We can't move people off Hunnell Road who are camping there because we don't have a safer place to put them. Not put them, but to ask them, to invite them to go to. And so I think just some engagement on, yes, we understand that this is an issue. Yes, we understand that we need to provide a safer location for families to camp. Ideally, we would put them in houses. But what are you going to do once we do identify those sites? What are you going to do for the individuals who are kind of thumbing their nose at the kind of enhanced level of service that now the city is providing? Does that answer your question, Cassie, or were you looking for something else?
I guess I'm thinking fire safety as well, because that's a forest area, and and I ride my bike through that area, and I just think, and I certainly have compassion for these people. Yep. It's just knowing where the safety issues are and how can we work with the city as neighbors to kind of keep people in the loop. It sounds like you're in the loop, but
yeah, I think you're asking for something that, can we provide more information to the community about the services that are available? Can we provide more opportunities for community members to engage directly with the organizations that are providing those services? We all know that we don't want to just dump a bunch of old clothes and used blankets at the door, but I think that's what people want to find. Is there a way that I can contribute to the solution? I think if there is a fire issue, if you want to email me directly, Cassie, and then we can go look at that and see. We have such our arms around the fire risk at Juniper Ridge. We haven't talked broadly about the risk at the location you're talking about. So I'm happy to do some follow-up and get back to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, just a reminder, we are beyond our time frame here, but I know, Lisa, you had your hand up as well.
Thank you, Hans. Just a quick question. Carolyn, do you have any idea how much it's going to cost to set up this camp?
So we probably can figure out some gravel and figure out what some fencing would cost. So we could do those back of the envelope, which is part of the kind of the site feasibility. But no, generally, we have never as a city entered into a managed camp contract. We have some experience with the COVID response. We provided, I think, a $50,000 grant to each Reach, which is a new nonprofit, and Family Kitchen, so that we could provide services. I think that's probably, managing a camp is probably that a month. So one of the things that I talked about is, so we're putting together the managed camp contract. What we have now is kind of the final draft scope of work. And then we need, just like any contract the city would let, we need to take that out and have people propose to us what that cost would be. And then it will be up to us, from definitely the city council, probably funds coming from the general fund, to agree to enter into those contracts. So it's the cost. So just to get a sense, so when Bethlehem Inn added 50 beds to their shelter, it took them 3 years and cost $9 million. So we're not talking about anything that expensive. What we know from Neighbor Impact is it costs about $600,000 a year to run a 50-bed shelter. So I think that's like $1,000 a bed per month. Someone on this call is probably faster at math than I. I think it will be less expensive than that. But for 20, if we think about 20 campsites, we're probably talking maybe $20,000 a month. I'm making it up, but to run a managed camp. So that's what I'm estimating, but I'm making those numbers up kind of based on my recently acquired knowledge of what it takes to do this. And so it will really be up when we do that request for proposal. That will be the first time we start to see the costs.
Thank you. I love how detailed you get in your responses. Has this group already exhausted all of the opportunities to work with some of the smaller hotels that are sitting mostly empty this time of year?
So the acquisition of hotels has been front and center since the beginning of the COVID emergency. And so we have identified 6 hotels in Deschutes County that would be open to an acquisition. So we're working through that. They're probably not they may be the hotels you guess, but they may not be. We have one hotel that we are, the budget in, and the address I just lost the address. But that county has that under contract for COVID isolation and related issues. And so we imagine it would be a very similar contract to something like that. So the governor has an executive board, and that is how the legislature is essentially making decisions right now through COVID. And the legislature has allocated $65 million to acquire motels and hotels in both the fire-stricken counties the counties that experienced fire back in September, and then and a portion of that money is available to other counties. So Deschutes County will have access to about $35 million through Neighbor Impact and partners to acquire motels. And then that leaves us as a community to figure out how we raise funds to operate those shelters. But it's absolutely at the forefront and has been since about March 16th. And the new funds being allocated from the e-board are hopefully we see them come into this community and we can make good use of them.
Are those funds coming out of the general fund?
I think so. That's a great question. I knew the answer, and that's just, I don't want to say yes or no, but I do think so. But we can follow up with Michaela and make sure that information is available.
Great. Thank you for your presentation.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Carolyn. Appreciate it. Okay, let's get on with some of the work that we have been doing internally, starting with the land use working group. And I guess I'll call on Dave or Lisa to update us. I should say, by the way, that the land use working group did formally appoint Lisa as chair. So Lisa, will you speak first to the October 26th Planning Commission work session review?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Hans. And Dave, feel free to jump in at any time. So October 26th, we held the work session with the Planning Commission. And during that presentation with Pauline at the helm, we overviewed all of the requested changes that came out of the land use working group and the NLA. I think the planning commissioners asked some really good questions, and I want to be just totally upfront. I think everybody around the table knows that some of the developers have some concerns about these changes, in particular the extension of time for both the public meetings as well as the comment period. And arising out of these requests, we also met with Polish Homes. When did we do that? About a week and a half ago, I think. And
Yes.
we just did a small team of us that it was more of a listening session with Polish to hear them out. And subsequently, we have another developer meetings planned for Monday, the 16th of November at 3 p.m. And anybody's welcome to attend that one as well. And I don't know that we're going to hear any new information. I have a feeling it's going to be the same concerns that have already been presented either at the land use working group meeting from October or during our presentation with the Planning Commission or the subsequent meeting with Polish. So some of the other changes are not in question. Things like the mailed notices, Polish didn't have any issue with that at all because they already send their notices to a radius of 500 feet from the development rather than 250. And so some of these changes are non-issues, but the biggest heartache seems to be around the extension of time. Dave, do you have something?
Yeah, you know, we've talked about the extension of time, and we have the view graph that shows that the block of times that we're asking for fit nicely with the city's current code. And so I guess I still don't understand why the builders are concerned about that.
And Dave, you're reminding me, I've made a couple of requests through Michaela, and I thought that somebody from the city was going to be reaching out to me, but I don't think that has happened yet. I wanted someone from the city to clarify from their perspective where we're having that time issue concern. Polish raised a good point with, you know, in the example that they gave, it was a snowstorm or a situation where they experienced a delay on the front end, and that pushed them further into the fall season, and it pushed them so far that they missed the ability to do some paving because a snowstorm hit. I think that, you know, that's a worst case scenario, and the delay happened on the beginning part, but I can see this cascading effect, the cascading delay. So I understand it, but we're wrestling with trying to make things better for our neighbors, trying to involve them more in the process. And on the opposite end, we've got ourselves in a little bit of a dilemma about this time extension. Dave, anything else on that?
Yes, it's my opinion that one instance does not settle a general problem. And I can always find one instance that disproves something. And you don't have to go far to do that. Show me 5 out of the 750 applications that went in this year. Show me 5 that were affected by the changes that we're asking for, and I'll consider them. But one failure or one instance does not make a case for any builder.
Dave, let me interject there, Dave. I do want to hear about yesterday's Planning Commission meeting also. But Dave, I think what you made an observation, you asked a question, and I think they're related. And I think the question of why another opportunity for developers to address us is so they can speak to those sorts of things that you just posed. And so I think that's a legitimate question for the 16th. I tend to agree with you. And we're looking here at the greater good, and we're trying to do things that will cause the developers to get more public support. But I think those sorts of questions are why there's going to be another session. And I'll talk to the timing later about that. But if Lisa,
Hans, let me interject. I was not talking about the issue as it's coming up. I talked about the issue as what the developers brought to us in the beginning.
I understand.
I am more than pleased that we're going to have another session to talk to all of them. So I'm not opposed to that. I was just talking about, I think Lisa and I were reporting what has happened, not what opportunities the builder is going to have to talk to us again.
Okay. Let's go to yesterday's meeting planning. Kathy or Lisa, do you want to give us a brief on yesterday's planning, since the topic was juniper related?
Kathy, do you have anything to say? I don't want to steal all of the time.
I guess I could summarize quickly what I thought I heard. The main focus was on what the Juniper Ridge Advisory Committee has done in the overlay zone. And then there wasn't very much talk about what Carolyn talked about today, what might be happening in the other part of Juniper Ridge. The minute people hear Juniper Ridge, they have a concept in their mind, and they either get, they get kind of firm about what they know about Juniper Ridge. And so I think there is still some confusion out there. The city, I can't remember his name, the guy from the city who has worked with the Juniper Ridge Advisory Committee did most of the
Matt.
Yeah, Matt Stewart. And there wasn't a good deal of exploration into what Juniper Ridge, the changes in code there might mean for the rest of the city. It didn't seem to be too problematic to me that it's pretty site specific. I did catch one question about, well, why are we trying to make this all industrial with no living quarters, just a caretaker apartment or something allowed for any of development there? Because this person thought I can't remember who that was who brought this up, but thought we had moved beyond the idea of having the industrial stuff off away from the city where people had to drive to it. And I thought that was a very good question. And in fact, I just shared that I lived in the Vail Valley for a while in Colorado, and there they required people to build worker housing along with anything that was constructed, not maybe enough units to keep everybody in the store, but 5 to 10, something like that, apartments would go along with a grocery store. And I really think that would be an excellent approach for Ben to consider, but that's my personal opinion. And I think that summarizes everything I can remember at the moment from that meeting. I did take some notes.
Yeah, I think a couple of things that I came away from that meeting was, first of all, there still doesn't seem to be a high demand for selling that property.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kathy, you heard that too,
I'm
right?
disagreeing. That's true. And they compared prices of Juniper Ridge with other places in Oregon, and there was a variety as to whether people thought it was way more expensive or way less expensive. There are a lot of rock outcroppings there that are supposed to be incorporated and maybe not busted down to flat earth. And of course, previous to now, there really weren't services there. Why would you want to build if there was going to be a sewer coming through, that would disrupt everything?
And I got the impression that we are a ways off, at least a couple of years before they even consider additional changes related to adding residential areas. So it was an interesting presentation, and I believe that Matt is going to be reaching out to Michaela to make an additional presentation.
Okay. Thank you. Let's make note of a few dates here that I have in my notes here. So we know that the 16th, 3 to 5 will be the developer input. The way that changes the timeline, previously, the timeline for these recommended code changes would have had a projected January 15 effective date. So this additional meeting puts us at another Planning Commission hearing. Well, it will be a hearing on December 14, first reading to council January 20, second reading to council for these recommended code amendments, code changes, Feb 3 with a March 5 effective date. So essentially, these things that we've been working on for the last 18 to 24 months are going to be some of the early work that our new council will be doing. But the projected effective date is March 5th. And then on these Juniper Ridge Code amendments, there's a hearing December 14. And I think these are important dates, and you can reach through Michaela or Carolyn, you can get all of these, of course, but council work session is tentatively set for Jan 20, council hearing and first reading Feb 3, second reading Feb 17, effective date March 20 if things go to this schedule. So the Juniper Ridge Code amendments would be effective, again, it's a ways out, but March 20 would be the effective date if that all goes to schedule.
I put those in the chat just in case you want them now.
Thanks, Michaela.
Hans,
I'll-
excuse me. Sorry,
Yes,
just
Lisa.
to add, we do have the land use working group meeting this Thursday afternoon from 3 to 5. One of the things that did come out of the discussion with Polish is that they really did appreciate an invitation for them to attend that working session or that work group meeting. And I think that we can develop some good partnership ideas during that session. Our plan this week is to talk about the developer packet. So hopefully we can move that forward now that the city has completed their review of the developer packet. And that's it. Okay.
Thank you, Michaela. We had our first boundaries working group meeting November 3rd. And maybe we had some technical glitches, but only 5 of our 8 members were present. We had Karen Bergsvik offered to chair that group, but until we all meet together as a group, we'll table that for the moment. So I would say that anyone that didn't attend, if you have an interest in chairing the boundaries group, we will bring that up at our next meeting. That meeting is yet to be determined. The driving factor for that is each of us are to understand, present the information of boundaries and the goals of addressing boundaries, get feedback from our board, and bring that feedback to the next boundaries group meeting. So Michaela sent out discussion prompts, just good things to touch base on, but largely it's how your board feels about the work that we propose on the boundaries, some of the pros and the cons and the repercussions. We want to be sure that there's a level of support on the NLA to move forward, but our plan would be to use the input from each of our NAs within the NLA context and per the next boundaries group meeting to structure something that we could take to council and put it on their radar for goal setting for the biennium. So this is very similar to what we did with the land use working group. In the spring of actually 18, this discussion started about land use education. It became part of biennium goals. It was incorporated. It's the level of support that council and staff are directed to give us on the topics that council supports. So that's our plan, is to present the boundaries group to city council in time for them to consider it in their goal setting, which is typically Jan, Feb, maybe a little bit into March. Is that the correct time frame, Michaela?
Yes.
Okay, any questions on that? We probably won't have a December meeting. So the action item here, our homework for each of us, I will speak to ABNA and the reports, but our homework, if you will, is to be sure that we come to the next boundaries meeting with clear understanding of where our respective boards and members stand with respect to the work that we propose to do on neighborhood association boundaries. Any questions on that?
Cassie has her hand
I have a
raised.
quick
Jesse?
Yeah, it's sort of confusing to our neighborhood which option we are involved in, because I know Michaela said possibly option 2. And we're having a board meeting on Monday to kind of review the questions, but we're not really sure how we fit into the discussion and what, basically we're supposed to review the options and see what we feel about them. Is that correct?
Yeah, so let me share that, and then Lisa, I'll get to you. I should have mentioned that I think we somewhat misled ourselves, if you will. We had 3 options, and one of the options mentioned NART, and I think the intention there was that NART probably is in a position to gather information or to provide something to NLA for consideration. We talked about this, similar to the way the Bend Neighborhood Coalition provided a lot of important information for our land use working group to consider. But I want to be clear that that option, and I probably misstated this during the boundaries meeting, but that option was not for the NLA to assign work to NART. That would be an extension of the NLA, and that would be a violation of public meeting rules. So I will be going to the NART meeting on Monday, and I will make that very clear to NART. Our thought was that NART is in a position to gather information and supplement, maybe even make some proposals or recommendations to the NLA, but we are not going to direct them to do any work. I think our options here are, first of all, we need to agree that our NAs support the concept of addressing neighborhood association boundaries for some of the reasons we've talked about, like the potential to maybe merge neighboring NAs for stronger, deeper boards, or the potential to use resources differently. We've talked about more equitable representation of all of the members in the city or the underrepresented groups, particularly the 2,380 undeveloped acres. So those, I think the options we're largely talking about are the things that would result in code changes. Lisa?
Exactly what Hans is saying, but I want to point out that just because we saw 3 options on a slide, we're not limited to just those options. So I don't think that anyone should say this is the only way it can be, option A, B, or C. What we're trying to do, we were trying to provide a little bit of structure and provide a little bit of an idea of how it could go. We don't really have an idea, and until the boundaries group really gets in there and rolls their sleeve up and starts talking about what are the issues, we think we know what the issues are. You know, we think that we've got a significant imbalance of neighborhood associations on the east side compared to the west side, where in some cases, you know, gosh, what is it? One neighborhood is 10 times as large as another neighborhood. And that just doesn't quite seem right, to use that word, in terms of representation. So we're not limited to just those options, but the boundaries group needs to officially meet and needs to start asking the questions. You know, how do we define our neighborhoods? How do we define a member? That was a question that I brought up to NART. It's a question that I brought up even before we started the Neighborhood Leadership Alliance. A lot of these neighborhood associations define members very differently, whether it is the property owner, whether it is the person who lives at the property. Some neighborhoods count the household as a member, while other neighborhoods count maybe it's everybody who lives within that household. So maybe it's 3 people rather than just one household. And we need to understand some basics so that we can get some commonality and understand where we need to move.
Let me jump in here. The only official question that has been sent out to all of the NAs had exactly 3 choices. I think in order for us to have the ability to come in with other options. We need for the city and specifically for Michaela to say these three options were not developed by the NLA. In fact, I don't think the NLA ever brought up any of those three options. Not in any meeting that I was at.
Let me say, Dave, I don't disagree with that, but I want to get back to what we really need to do as representatives to our NAs. We need to be clear that there's an understanding that there are reasons to consider shifting NA boundaries. We need to be clear that no one is going to be forced to do something. It would have to be a collective, collaborative effort of all the NAs working for the greater good, trying to achieve ultimately what neighborhood associations were intended to do, and that is really represent its members. But that being said, I think the first order of business is for the NAs to weigh in on this and say that they support the idea of a process to address these boundaries. This isn't what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen. Really what we're asking for, I think, is let us know if your board supports the idea of us proposing to council that council review the value of addressing neighborhood association boundaries. That's really our first action item here. The options might have been arguably, maybe they were premature, but the first order of business is, do we as an advisory committee fundamentally and by majority support the idea of asking council to consider boundaries as a council goal? That's really what we're trying to do here. Lisa, did you have your hand up? Okay.
Cassie does.
Cassie?
I just wanted to add that my impression started this was a city presentation about the UGB expansion boundaries, and then it sort of evolved into what are our options as a neighborhood association. And so I'm trying to figure out, I'm still confused as to kind of where we sit on this, because it sounds like they're just asking us some questions. Michaela's put together a list of questions that we were looking to answer. And then there's the question as to where do we as a neighborhood association see ourselves in terms of, do we want to see those boundaries change? That's what I thought I heard you say. So there's sort of two different areas of how do we address the questions that Michaela sent out versus what do we want to do as a neighborhood association.
Well, I think those discussion prompts were to stimulate discussion among your board, not necessarily, I wouldn't say they were merely rhetorical, but I don't think you were expected to necessarily ask each of those questions. It was really to stimulate the discussion. I think we all know that this undeveloped land is going to get developed. People are going to live there and they need to be represented like all of us are currently. That's a given. So that part of the argument seems moot, but the question is,
actually, Hans, it's not moot. It turns out that until we have some kind of a statement about how you would bring in neighborhood associations for the expansion areas, we need to have something about mentorship, because you just can't open up a 4,000 or 5,000 house or door area in the UGB without having some plan about how to mentor it until it is able to take over its own NA.
well, and to that point, Dave, I think the concept of NA boundaries, whether we talk about mentorship or whether we talk about expansion, I know at least one NA has said, hey, we're as big as we choose to be. We don't want to be bigger. But that being said, I think to your point, those are the sorts of things that endorse the value of making this something that council considers, because there are so many aspects to this, and there's going to be so many more people coming into our city over the next 5 to 10 years. Those are the reasons we collectively as an advisory committee need to decide if this is worthy for the value of neighborhood associations in the future of Bend. Are we going to ask council to make this a goal that we study over the next couple of years? So I don't disagree with that at all, but I think I want to get back to pointing out that what we're saying here is, are we ready to say, council, this is something that really needs to be tackled like land use education, It'll be long-term, it'll happen over a couple of years, and it'll probably still be happening in the biennium after the next biennium, but it's time to get started on this because our demographics have changed so much, our growth has changed so much since 15 or almost 20 years ago when NAs were first formed. So I think it's something that's probably overdue, and we're putting it on the table saying this is something that's important for all of our residents, and we want council support, and we need council to validate that they see the value in that. Each NA has to weigh in on that, the way I'm perceiving this.
I
Cassie?
agree, but until we start talking about other, right now you're talking about the 13 NAs that are defined, but we're talking about urban growth boundaries, and some of us live near several of these urban growth boundaries, and they need protection.
Don't disagree, Dave.
I don't think that we, as an NLA, can go to council and say, we want you to start changing the boundaries.
Well, what I'm saying is this topic has been, ever since we first discussed it 2 years ago, it was in our strategic plan to bring this to council. This is in our roadmap. We are saying to council, or we are asking council, this has been on our roadmap for 2 years, and we are ready to start working on this with your support. We'd like you to incorporate this in city goals if you see the value and the appropriateness of it. So this is something these are questions asked and answered 2 years ago. We're at the point now where we want council to say, yes, we support this, and staff will support you in your effort, and we'll get on with this over the next 2 or 3 years like we have land use.
And I just want to reiterate here before we move on to rep reports, but Joshua, we are more than willing to come to your board meetings and help discuss what we're trying to do here. With the discussion prompts, this is just our way of getting a feel for where everyone is at. And so the sooner that we have those turned in, the better we're going to have, or the more time we're going to have to put together that presentation for council, because we'll know what the neighborhood associations are actually wanting out of this project. And don't get me wrong, it will be NLA led. We're not going to ask council to change our boundaries and then drop it. The NLA is going to work alongside council, alongside city staff to come up with a solution that works for everyone. And so just this first step here is finishing those discussion prompts. I think you will see in the prompts, once you get talking with your boards, that we're not asking you to choose one of the 3 options. We're saying, do you prefer any of those options? If not, what other ideas do you have? And so, Dave, that would be a great opportunity to put something about your mentorship idea in there. And so that's really, we're just in the information gathering stage. And so what our ask of you is that you start these conversations with your boards and get us those discussion prompts promptly.
Okay, let's move on to reports. We still have time. I will kick it off because I usually follow roll call. So I will say, and I will send, I have a board meeting tomorrow. I will put more detail to this, but I will say, while we're still on this topic, I've been talking to my board for months now about boundaries. It's no new subject. The ABNA board supports reviewing, addressing, considering changes in the boundaries for all the many reasons we've discussed. I'll be formalizing that after I meet with my board tomorrow, but basically ABNA supports presenting this to council as part of the biennium goal setting. I will attend, as I said, I'll attend NART as the NLA liaison next Monday, 5 to 6:30. I will reiterate that we are looking at NART as a group that if they want to bring us considerations for our work, but it's not going to be NLA directed. I want to mention too, Michaela was kind enough to include our ABNA experience with our virtual general membership meeting. And I think there's enough there for all of you to move forward if you decide to do our virtual meeting. Naturally, If there's voting involved and it's electronic, that's something different, but I'm not getting into your bylaws, just saying that for us, that virtual general membership meeting was really, really well attended. And basically you're just having a Zoom meeting with your board for all intent and purposes, but it's streaming to YouTube. And we've had well over 800 hits of that recorded general membership meeting. So really encourage you to consider that. It's pretty painless and straightforward. We only had one small technical glitch, but it's been a real success for us. And I want to say thanks to Lisa, because we basically stole it from the success she had doing that format with the candidate forum. We spent a lot of time on Juniper, and I'm just going to remind everybody that, and Kathy, thank you for asking the question about other situations besides Juniper Ridge, and Cassie as well. There are pockets of situations like this probably in all the NAs, and I know that Boyd Acres is very concerned about particularly Juniper Ridge, but we have had some success in our NA using these really hot topics to generate some dialogue, get people to come to our website, ask questions, and we've picked up membership from it, but it also gives us an opportunity to get in touch with people and weigh in on how they feel. And I know that there's all the accusations about NIMBY, but look, these are really emotional things sometimes, and if it's an opportunity that you can put real information to your membership, I think we all want to be timely and relevant. That's how we build membership for the most part. So I'd say, you know, Juniper is just an opportunity. I mean, engage, inform, represent. That's what we say from time to time. And I want to say thanks to Lisa too for setting up that meeting with Polish and letting me attend. I'm really enthused that Polish and others, but Polish particularly, expressed their desire to work with us in the land use education. And I think that's really valuable. So with that, enough of that. I will move on to Lisa.
Thanks, Hans. CWNA met last month, and we spent the majority of the meeting talking about how we might be more effective. Ultimately, I have 5 board members, and of those board members, I am really challenged with getting anyone to step up into official roles like vice chair, secretary, treasurer, land use chair, and communications. And so around the boundaries discussion, we've been taking a look at very seriously at looking at our nearby neighbors, because it may be beneficial for us to combine with other NAs in order to spread out some of the work. Right now, most of the work is landing on my shoulders, and I didn't anticipate being involved in a neighborhood association on a full-time basis. So I am eager to move the boundaries discussion forward from that perspective. Other than that, we had wonderful congratulations for Nathan and carrying off the land use candidate forum. It went off wonderfully, as we've been talking about, but Nathan was very instrumental with that. And we finalized or finished the meeting rather with a topic on our upcoming Firewise meeting and what that might look like, whether it's going to be in person or somehow a virtual Firewise event. That's it.
Thank you, Lisa. Karen.
I'll make it really short. Our general meeting's next Tuesday. We are doing it via Zoom, not doing it with OSU or the community college, but having people log in to a Zoom address. So we'll see how that goes. And Chief Krantz is our guest speaker. So we're having people submit questions in advance. Century West and Old Farm and Southern Crossing, we're sharing storage space now and splitting the costs. So if any other NAs are interested, please let me know. There's more room and it lowers our cost to a nominal thing, and you don't have to keep things in your garage anymore. The storage unit is by Crux or Spoken Moto. And so we would welcome other NAs if you want to store things. And I think it helps all of us in the end. Speaking of helping each other, Michaela put out that I was working on bylaws a couple months ago, and I did work on Southern Crossing bylaws, but 2 other NAs have come forward in the last 30 days that also want to do bylaw work. And so I suggested that maybe in the winter, we could take it offline in a slower time and then put together a subgroup, not affiliated with NLA, but just interested neighborhood associations. And we can dive deeper into bylaws. And it's, so if you are interested in bylaws, let me know. I'm not an expert. We just sort of found out by accident what didn't work. And then I read a lot of the existing neighborhood association bylaws online. And that's kind of how we came to be. But that's about it.
Thanks, Karen. Jim Christo.
Okay, I just had to unmute here. So we've resumed our meetings. They've been kind of outside in-person gatherings at the over at Mountain High, and but come the winter time, it's going to be a little more challenging because we kind of lost our inside meeting place over at the South Fire Station across from the Country Club. We will be meeting next week at the chairman's house to talk about boundaries, and there's been some initial discussions on it about maybe trying to expand into the thumb and elbow areas. But we'll talk about that more. I think one of the things that we're interested in is that whatever makes us have more impact with the city, because there's some feeling about the board that we probably don't have the impact that we'd like to have. And maybe some of that is due to, how small we are, because we're the second smallest group here. The other thing is I do have a couple of concerns. I don't know this is the best place to raise them, because I heard somebody saying about it, an official input into the city, and that might be better, but I'll just mention a couple of them. One is Murphy Road, and this is a transportation issue. We just got notified that it's going to be closed from Country Club to Peril Road until next summer. And that's a huge impact on the Fairway and Power Roads in the Wildwood subdivision. And so we're kind of wondering if there's some mitigation that can be done to kind of reduce the load of traffic on that particular development. So I would be hoping the city could kind of take a look at that and get back to us and see what could be done. So one of our issues was we haven't had city reps attend SEBNA meetings, but I understand from an earlier intervention that Michaela is willing to do that. So I will work with the board and see if we can extend an invitation and get her to come to one of the meetings and listen to our concerns. And then the last one is, again, I think relative to our size, the land use chair spends an awful lot of time, on land use issues, but he just doesn't feel he gets a lot of traction. So that's just some of the concerns. I didn't want to get too negative because my first time here, but the board asked me to relay those concerns. So I hope I've done that in a more positive light. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. That's exactly what we hope to do, is be sure that we understand what your board members are concerned about. I noticed Michaela taking notes. I suspect she's going to reach out to David Abbas and his team regarding Murphy Road. So I expect something will happen there. Chris Freeze. Chris, if you can hear me, you might want to unmute.
Oh yeah, that helps. I can hear you.
I unmuted you. You're good.
Oh
now.
yeah, and I was already, I'm from Old Bend. We had a board meeting last night. We discussed boundaries, and the short answer is we're happy with our present boundaries. We will miss Chris Piper, who was our liaison to the council, and I wonder how going forward the new council members will be distributed to the various or various neighborhoods. Will that program continue? And I may not get an answer now, but I'd surely like to hear in a month who it is, because Chris was very helpful for us to understand.
Yeah, I can. Sorry to interrupt. I can speak to that. So new council members come on in January, and then they may, if any of them have interest in being liaisons to particular committees, they may ask the mayor, but that's probably something that will get sorted out. Hopefully before the end of January, but there's no formal process for doing it. It depends on availability, capacity, interest, and just kind of the mix of people and their interests that we'll have in January. But I hope it won't be too long until that's resolved.
And how would a request from a neighborhood association for one of the persons, would that be inappropriate?
No, I don't think so. I mean, my take on this is, you know, as individuals in neighborhood associations, you're always welcome to provide input to council. And if you have thoughts on who might be well suited to do that role, you're welcome to share them. I guess if I were giving you advice, I would start with the mayor and go from there.
This is Michaela. I'm working with Anne on this also. And so I'd be curious if you are having that discussion, you have certain people in mind that you feel like would be good fits for your boards, feel free to send that to me so that I can have that on the top of mind as we go through this process of assigning council.
Will do. We discussed tiny homes. It was a very short discussion, but to keep everybody aware that within Old Bend neighborhood, we have 2 historic districts. And we hope that the tiny homes will come in a historic manner if they do come in, as our town or our neighborhood is walkable in a lot of ways, would be right. But we will defend the the historic nature of the hood. We're very happy that the transportation system plan passed, and we hope that that will help with our safety issue in our neighborhood, which is cut through traffic on Sizemore is truly fast and dangerous, and a lot of blind intersections that people blow through. So there needs to be some traffic easement. Was our request, and it's moving too slowly. The parking district is coming. We will be the first parking district will be in our neighborhood. It's on the west half of Old Bend, which could serve as an unfortunate dividing issue in the neighborhood of those in the parking district and those not. But the decision was largely the neighbors that the western half of the neighborhood was much more impacted by events, downtown people parking in our neighborhood and such. But the signs are going up. We're very enthused about it, and we're putting together an advisory committee to help with Toby on that. I think that's it.
Thank you, Chris. Cassie.
Hi, yeah, I wanted to say that we have a board meeting Monday. We're definitely reviewing the boundaries issue. So thank you for that clarification. And we're pushing our annual meeting out to February, but I wanted to ask Karen if she had done any work on the virtual vote. And I don't know if that's happening, and if you have any other information on your board meeting and how it's working, I would love to get your feedback on that. So, and I want to thank Hans for all the information he sent on his annual meeting. So that was very helpful too. I don't know if Karen, if you wanted to answer, did you do anything with that yet?
Yeah, we actually are doing virtual voting for board members and for bylaw approvals. So I'll get back to
So
you
can you send
on,
me your,
yeah, I'll send to you what we're doing.
I would like to
Okay,
see that
thank you.
too, from Old Bend.
Okay.
And I'm just going to add to make, because we're time short, that we have the Newport Corridor project is a big issue in our neighborhood right now. The city is doing some open houses and they're starting construction on 2021 in spring. But if anybody's interested in that project, they can go to the website. There's a lot of information on it. It's going to be a sewer and infrastructure project, so it's a big deal. And our neighborhood's interested in some of the roundabout and congestion issues that are going to happen in our neighborhood. And we definitely are, going to be reviewing what the city's doing there. So I think that's about it for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cassie. Dave Johnson.
Yes, we had our board meeting this last week, and the main issue was boundaries and bylaws. And so we are updating our bylaws to include boundaries. We did get a briefing from CET about the bus service down 15th and then across to Murphy. And we're pleased that we're going to get a bus route that is within walking distance of a lot of our people. The east side and south of Reed Market has been terribly underserved by the bus routes. So we love that. And while Chris is still on, since Jim Christo is still on, my chair would like to send some stuff to me. I sent you a chat with my email on it. If you could open your chat and then send me your email address, I'll send it on to James. But that's about, we're very concerned about the boundary discussion and the lack of any legislation that has to do with mentoring areas that come in with the UGB. And so, we're very concerned about that. So that's about it.
Thank you, Dave. Steve Pine, are you still with us? I'm not seeing you on my screen.
He had to log off.
Okay. Then Elizabeth Rhodes.
Sure. In Southwest Bend, I'll have a pretty short report. We were scheduled to have actually a socially distanced in-person meeting a couple of weeks ago, but had to cancel at the last minute. Judy Clinton, who is our land use chair, has and is a member of the NART. She communicated with the board about the question of the change in boundaries. So that discussion is up and going via email within our board. And on a positive note, we wrapped up our Green Team Brookswood cleanup on the last Friday of October and walked that area, Brookswood, from the Powers Roundabout all the way to the Brookswood Market area and cleaned up along from the Murphy Roundabout to the bridge. And so that was done 4 times this summer, and it will pick back up again next spring. So glad to have some community involvement with that. And I think that's about it.
Good deal. Congratulations. Thank you. Kathy, you want to round it out for us?
Okay, can you hear me? Did I get unmuted?
You're good.
This is Boyd Acres, and I guess most of the board's energy has been going into opposition to the transitional camp at Juniper Ridge. We have had several board meetings about that. I've been the lone no vote on most things. And just a thought, when we have a vote here on the NLA about things and there are one or to several people who are not voting with the majority, would it be possible to record that in the notes, just so that if notes go to city council or something, they can see that there was not unison? Anyway, Vonna is having a meeting on Wednesday, a virtual meeting, and it's going to have CET presenting to us about possible bus routes now coming to our area, which would be a big improvement. It would take me an hour to walk to a bus route as it currently is. I guess Vonna has said they don't think that the boundaries are wrong, but I see that there is a looming issue about the UGB boundary and what's going to happen as it expands, and how we incorporate that into Vonna, and then sort of an equality of votes between different representatives on the NLA to see that people within the city have adequate representation. Certainly the new Polish development out in the square, as they call it, and I forget what it's called, Petrosa, I think it's what it's called, where that's going to go might influence things. We have parts of our neighborhood that are not particularly active. The part that's to the west of Highway 97 that hangs out between Vonna and your area, Hans, we don't get very much participation from those folks. Maybe they would like to be added to Aubrey Butte rather than being part of Vonna, you know.
Yeah.
Possibly we should try to reach out to them specifically and see. So was there anything else? Oh, we did have a virtual vote, and our chair, Cindy King, and our the person who runs our website, Joette Storm, did it. And I don't remember all the details, but if somebody wants to contact them, I can get you their contact, or I think Michaela has it, so that they could get you information about how we did our virtual vote. And we are also in the position of having, when new people come on, they mostly don't want to take on a vice chair job. They want to do something else. Both of our newest members to the board kind of have their own focus as to what they want to do, or they have limited time. And yes, we have people on the board who are threatening to quit all the time because they're just overwhelmed. Our land use chair, I think it's pretty much a full-time job for him. It's way more work for me than I ever anticipated, being both NLA and the secretary to the board. So I sympathize with those comments. And I also think that we're having Julie Craig from the city come to talk about reducing fuels and controlling or treating vegetation around areas to reduce fire risk in areas. I hope she's coming. We had set it up at one time. It may have fallen through. So that's what I know. And I thought this was a really good meeting.
Okay. Hey, thank you all. Thanks for the extra few minutes. I appreciate all the input. Kathy, thanks especially for that input regarding those folks in Boyd Acres that are more Aubrey Butte adjacent. We'll figure out, maybe you and I can figure out how best to represent them. And just a reminder for Land Use Working Group, we'll be meeting in a couple of days. So thank you all. I appreciate it. Good evening.
Bye. Thanks for the time.
Hey, bye-bye. Thanks for a good meeting.